Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wyatt Claypool Show. What's telling me that Mark Carney is probably not going to be a very successful Liberal Party leader has been his reaction and his own campaign's reaction to those they disagree with. If you show up to a Mark Carney campaign event and you just openly do not agree with many of his policy positions, they won't let you stick around the room, maybe ask him a question or something like that. They will escort you out. This is not something that Pierre Poilievre and his campaign does, and it shows to me that there is sort of a lacking in personableness to Carney that I think is going to end up hurting him in the long run. He's lacking confidence, and to talk about this, I want to bring on Bryan Breguet, who has been on the receiving end of a polite escorting out of a Mark Carney event for the crime of not being like a diehard Carney fan. So, Bryan, how's it going? Did you get manhandled? What happened?
All right. Yeah, no, that was a roller coaster yesterday. So Carney had an event in North Van yesterday at 6:30. And I didn't, I registered a long time ago for all the updates, but I usually don't get them. But I had registered for the event and I never received a confirmation that I was invited. So I had friends who had received the confirmation. So, I went there thinking, they're not going to let me in. I'm not on the list. And sure enough, I arrived. My friend was there already and said, yeah, you're not on the list. I checked. And other people were not on the list and they're not being let in. So anyway, I'm like, I'm here. I might as well wait. And so I go, I explain, I give my name to one of the volunteers. And they tell me, okay, yeah, it's fine. They give me a stamp on my hand and I go inside waiting for Carney. So I wait with my friends for about, I would say 30 minutes. And then all of a sudden there was a security guard who's there standing in front of the room and he's looking left and right. And then he approached me and he had my picture on his phone, like my profile picture from Twitter. And he said, hey, is that you? And, I should have lied at this point. I should say, oh, absolutely not. This guy is much better looking than me, So, and I said, yeah. I said, yeah, no, you need to come with me. And we left the room and he had to make a phone call. And at that point, I'm like, I told him, I was like, look, are you kicking me out or just wasting my time? At this point, he's like, no, you need to talk to a manager. I'm like, okay, where? And he's like, oh, over there. So he escorts me all the way, like at the back, well, at the front technically, but nobody is there anymore. And we're waiting. There is another security guard. I don't want to make, their life difficult or anything. I wait 5-10 minutes. I ask again. I'm like, look, guys, am I just being kicked out or is somebody actually coming to talk to me? It's like, no, somebody's coming. I waited another 10 minutes. Nobody came. I decided to leave at this point. I had a friend leaving anywhere. So I wasn't, rudely escorted out. Like they didn't carry me or anything. But I mean, I just couldn't be there. I got the feeling that the security guard had no idea what was going on. They just got a text or an order to remove this guy from the room. And that's what happened. So, which I think is pretty pathetic, honestly.
And this has been kind of a pattern with Carney's campaign from literally his launch in Edmonton. They've not been allowing not even just mainstream, but just non-friendly media sources in. You'll have like really small fringe type organizations let in, but they're obviously left wing, but independent media is kept out in places where they're obviously not going to make a disruption because you end up making yourself look like an idiot. And that's the thing too, that it's like, I don't really see what the benefit to Mark Carney's whole persona is by removing people. Like, I just want to quickly play this video. This has been an ongoing thing even recently with just random citizens who have signed up to be Liberal Party members being kicked out. And yeah, you could say they ironically signed up, but like you allowed people to ironically sign up. I don't get what the problem is.
I'm a lawyer, so I'm not going to. We should give this traitor a good old warm welcome. Referring to a member in good standing as a traitor, despite your failure to spell a lot of these words, is not okay. We're challenging your membership, sir, and I'm asking you to leave. And
we're going in this party, but build our very upon for many years.
I think the thing with this is that when you contrast this to Pierre Poilievre, again, I don't want to go back to this too much, but like as Carney, you should be basically trying to demonstrate, if I'm your advisor, that you can kind of go toe to toe with Pierre Poilievre in terms of your, strength of character. And Poilievre will literally allow PPC guys to debate him in his photo line, but you have Carney, who you're not even allowed to stand in the room with them. You've been to, Canada Future Party events. You've been to other political events for people that you don't agree with. You're perfectly fine. I guess they don't want you like tweeting or something about the event.
Yeah, I don't know. I was quite surprised because, exactly. Obviously, I was behaving correctly. I wasn't creating a scene or anything. They could just have, observed me at that time. And honestly, as soon as I was let in, I thought that was over because I was very surprised they kicked me out because it's gonna create bad press, right? I don't want to give myself too much importance there, but I'm like, at this point, that was the easy path, was just let Bryan in. He's gonna tweet a little bit. I'm not even tweeting that, I'm not even putting their guys in a negative way most of the time. I've said good things about Mark Carney, and just let it go. I'm one out of 1,000 people here, so you're making a bigger scene and a bigger mess by actually kicking me out. So that's funny. Actually, yesterday, one of the person I was with, after the event, she went for a beer with the person managing Mark Carney Twitter account. And that person was actually upset I got kicked out. So I'm guessing that, there must be like a boomer as part of the campaign who said, we cannot take any chance. This guy cannot be in the room. We need to kick him out.
Did you sign up to be a Liberal Party member to vote in the leadership?
No, I'm not a member. I signed up for the updates. I don't like signing up for, even though it's free, I don't like sabotaging or signing up ironically for another party. I've argued against this in the past, so I didn't do it myself. I should have, at least that would have made it more difficult for them to remove me. But as we saw in the video, even though it doesn't matter, if they want to kick you out, they kick you out.
Yeah, I also didn't end up taking out a free Liberal membership. Like, one, they also can't argue that, oh my goodness, all these people are signing up ironically. I'm like, yeah, you made it free. This is the whole point of making people pay money, to make it so that you're not incentivized to do it. Either be like the Americans and you're automatically registered as an independent Republican and Democrat, and there's really no reason to switch because it's like a drop in the bucket, or make it a fee if you're going to have a small amount of people actually choosing your leader. By the way, it's kind of embarrassing that they only got up to 400,000 people qualified to vote. The Conservatives, with a $15 one-year membership fee, which is pretty rich if you think about it, they ended up getting 675,000 people signed up to vote in that leadership. And that was like a true coronation where there wasn't really any real opposition, especially after Patrick Brown was removed, because he's an actual fraudster. Like, by the way, guys, he is Mr. Ballot Box Stuffing. But anyways, I want to get back to just, I think this is demonstrating, because, yeah, you're saying that the social media guy managing it knows you and probably understands the social media landscape of people who, are really not a danger. They might jab you here and there, but they're not really actually a threat to your campaign. But it demonstrates that so many people, at least in my mind, that are running the Liberal Party are still from like the early 2000s, very fussy, trying to make sure every hair is in place on the candidate's head. And I don't think that really works in the current political landscape, that Mark Carney is going to be the guy who stands up very straight, holding the microphone, looking professional, and that a lot of people are going to say, oh, I like the cut of that guy's jib, make him prime minister. These days, and it's not just because of Trump, but these days because of how people consume media and engage with politics, you got to be the person who can hang in for an hour and a half podcast and actually show yourself to be like a substantive person. Where the problem with Mark Carney and the problem with Chrystia Freeland, maybe we can talk about her visit to Vancouver as well, is that it's kind of that drive-by shooting type media. I jump on, smile a little bit with Rosemary Barton on the CBC, and then we move on to collecting checks from people at a very small donor event and then run away to something else. Because how many people were at the Freeland events? Like you said, like 40.
That's what I heard, and the picture she posted really didn't look very good for her, right? No, you're absolutely right. Those are people who I don't think know how to campaign in the modern landscape. They're still, but to be fair, I don't know what they're trying to achieve right now, right? We know the team behind Carney is the same as the team behind Justin Trudeau, like literally, right? Gerald Butts and other. they might be campaigning to just save the furniture and just get their voters, their base. And they're pretty good at this. Yesterday was a good example of who their base was, like older white people, many of them still wearing masks. But it's not going to allow them to win an election. And it's going to make it very difficult to have a campaign for 30 days this way. And they should learn from other parties. If you look, for instance, at the BC NDP, I think they're not the best, but they're quite competent to run modern campaign. They know how to do it. And I don't feel the federal Liberals, they have the talent for this at this point.
Well, I think they've been doubling down on the exact same type of voter over and over again. And that's where
it worked for more elections, right? So that's what they're thinking.
Yeah, like obviously we're both conservatives. I run a conservative news site. You ran for the BC Conservatives in Vancouver, Lengara. So we're not talking about so whenever we talk about like what the Liberals should be doing, it's from like a pure perspective of not like wishful thinking because we're not Liberals, but like if I was a Liberal advisor, what would I be doing? And right now it seems like most of their polling recovery has really nothing to do with them winning suburbs that usually were locked out for them. They're not tracking to win a majority. We are only talking about if the Conservatives win a minority or a majority, because the Liberals seem to mostly just be recovering their downtown Toronto vote and their downtown Montreal vote. They can get all of that back and still have a massive Conservative majority end up taking Parliament. Because this is what Mark Carney's event looked like, just to show people. Like, it's decently impressive. That's probably equivalent of what a Pierre Poilievre 2022 leadership event was like. To be fair, it is in Vancouver. That is like very much home territory for the Liberals. But past the big cities, whenever I've seen Carney posting photos of suburbs or cities that are not traditionally liberal, that's when the crowd sizes fall down to just 50 people or 30 people. He's just at a coffee shop or something like that before he quickly moves on. And everything about the messaging is, again, it's kind of like the very boomer anti-American type rhetoric about how Canada's great, America sucks, and we need to protect Canada. And I'm not sure if that's actually going to resonate with the growing 18 to 24-year-old more conservative voter or the younger middle-aged voter, because those voters have shifted hard conservative. That's where the Conservatives are getting their 25% leads sometimes, and it's their next closest competitor is the NDP, in fact.
Yeah. No, the only thing I'm, as a conservative, I would be concerned with Carney is the first one is there is always Quebec, and polls so far numbers have been pretty good for Mark Carney in Quebec, even though his French is objectively pretty terrible. But it seems, Quebec and Quebecers really don't like Pierre Poilievre overall. That's just a different type of politics for them. So if he was to get really high numbers in Quebec, all of a sudden that's a lot and a lot of seats, right? So that could be problematic. The bigger picture outside of Quebec for me would be that now that, especially with Carney, they have their base back, as you said, the Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver seats, they don't have to worry as much about those. When just a month ago, they were about to fight to win Vancouver Centre, right? I think by now they're like, no, Vancouver Centre and a lot of Vancouver seats and Toronto downtown, we're good. So now they can put their effort, energy on the suburb. Will they be successful? They're going to need a different message. But it's, it does make it more difficult for Poilievre. It would have been so easy to run an election where the Liberals literally had to defend downtown Toronto seats. Then if they do this, they cannot focus on the 905. But now they will be able to do that.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up this poll result that came out of Leger the other day, showing that if Mark Carney did end up becoming the leader of the Liberal Party, if he's the leader option, that he ends up tying the Conservatives 37 to 37 with the NDP.
Yeah.
Falling all the way down to 12, Bloc at 6, Greens 5, PPC 2. How realistic do you think this is to actually hold up in the long run? Because just initially my take was always that this feels a lot like, I'm not one of these people who goes around like, polling's rigged. Polling goes through cycles. There's what you would call a response bias. And I think right now the kind of response bias surrounding Carney is, one, Trudeau's gone, so way more Liberals are likely to take a poll because they're less depressed right now. And then two, also, because a lot of people don't know who he is, yes, you are right. There are certain types of older Canadians who remember him as the Bank of Canada governor, and that, has some nostalgia to it. But there's also, I think, that the people who don't know him will just assume that he's generic competent liberal, where that's why Freeland doesn't pull very well, because you can't claim to be generic competent liberal because she's too well known.
Yeah, and so to go back to the poll, I mean, this one in particular seems to be an outlier, right? What we have seen over the last few weeks is there is a clear trend. The Liberals are climbing back up, and it's mostly at the expense of the NDP, right? The NDP is collapsing. We see it everywhere. This poll here is almost like an extrapolation or exaggeration of recent trends where not only the Liberals are back up, but they're literally back to, ahead and higher than they've been. You have to go back to 2015 to see them as high as 30%, 37% in an election. So,
and that's why the swing doesn't make sense to me, that when you put Chrystia Freeland in, like right here, that the Liberals are down to 28 and the Conservatives 39. Like, the swing between Carney and Freeland being the Liberal leader is like quite crazy. It's like 14 points or something like that.
Yeah, and this is between two people who are technically well known, right? I mean, Chrystia Freeland is well known. We know from Abacus data, the percent of Canadians who know Carney and Freeland was pretty similar, if I remember correctly. So
it was actually half. Only half of Canadians who recognized Freeland could recognize Carney. She was at like 60%, and he was at like 25%.
Oh, really? Okay. So it is, especially what we're seeing right now, both in the polls and technically, I think they're buying engagement online. They're getting way too many likes on their post for Carney. It's creating this phenomenon that it looks like a superstar. It's almost like a mini Poilievre effect where he gets those big rallies and his videos are popular and whatnot. But that feels so fake at this point. Yesterday wasn't fake. There were actually 1,000 people, but it's exactly the people who were expecting. Those are not the people who will like and share posts on Twitter. So where is this engagement coming from? Where is all the engagement on Google Trends coming from for Carney? I'm a little bit confused by this right now.
Unless I think a lot of it is just that simply more stories being written about you by the media will naturally mean that you're more likely to be searched for. Because if you're, Ruby Dalla, you're going to have far less people searching for you because people don't see coverage of you. It kind of is one of those circular sorts of relationships where the more people talk about you, the more people will search for you, and the more people search for you, the more they're talking about you and all that sort of thing.
And we see it, right? Carney, for instance, whenever he says anything, like he comes out and he says like the mildest thing where it's like, we need to build up, and he doesn't expand. And then he's covered in all the media, and we see on Google Trend, like literally that day, an hour later, it goes up. So he's benefiting from incredibly favorable coverage in the mainstream media right now, which is...
and not to repeat the Kamala Harris comparisons too much, but I kind of go back to thinking about his interview on Jon Stewart's show, and I thought that was one of those examples of an interview that, in my mind, kind of proved actually the weakness of Mark Carney. It wasn't even that bad, but the whole point was that you're seeing him at his Hollywood best because he is basically on the most Hollywood late night show he could possibly be on, and you always felt like he's a bit stiff, doesn't roll with the kind of energy that Jon Stewart's trying to put out. And I've been using that kind of as my base of reference for how is this man going to do in a debate? Is he going to be able to roll off an attack, be kind of funny, make points? And I think that he's going to come off more like a John Kerry and a Michael Ignatieff again. And I actually see the big obstacle for them. If I was Carney's campaign and I'm just trying to win the leadership and I don't care about anything past that, I would try and cancel the debate and not get into it. Because if Ruby Dalla and Chrystia Freeland is there, I don't see Mark Carney doing very well in terms of surviving attacks, because there's going to be a lot of videos easily cut by the Conservatives on everything that Freeland and Ruby and all these other people point out about how frankly hollow a lot of Mark Carney's achievements are, or how obviously involved he's been in all the worst decisions.
Yeah, and he's the front runner. We know it. He's gonna play. If he goes to a debate, it's gonna be a very defensive performance. He's gonna try to take as little risk as possible. I think the bigger picture, right, really for Carney is what we have seen so far is when he's on favorable territory, like the Jon Stewart show, and when he's prepared, he can be pretty decent. But as soon as he's not fully prepared, or he gets asked something he wasn't expecting, like fentanyl the other day, then he makes a mistake. Because I think fundamentally his instincts are wrong for the country and for what the electorate want. So I'm expecting after he wins this leadership, and if there's an election, whenever there's an election, I'm expecting his team to really protect him a lot. I mean, you're not taking questions from any media that isn't the CBC. And even there, during the campaign, you might select those questions in advance. You will not allow people to ask questions or anything, because you need to keep the brand, and he's going to make a mistake, and everything is inauthentic with him if you let him be alone.
Did you ever see the CBC exchange between Rosemary Barton and Chrystia Freeland when she started calling him an insider or whatever? And she actually got like really defensive about how can you call Mark Carney an insider when you have been the Minister of Finance for this many years? It's like, oh my goodness, what's wrong with you? Just wear a Carney button at this point, because they just will not allow criticism of the man. Where do you see the NDP actually kind of ending up in this federal election? Because I think that actually determines the success of the Liberals. Can they genuinely push the NDP down to just 12% in the polls? Or is it going to be one of these things where, you can push the NDP down far enough, but it tends to be a pretty diehard party in terms of a lot of its base will only ever vote NDP?
Yeah, no, there's a limit, right? I mean, as to how much you can extract from the NDP. You have the diehard, like literally socialist, communist guys who will not switch. You have all the people, on Gaza and foreign intervention. I'm pretty sure they're not going to agree with the Liberals. And at some point, the Carney campaign, right now, it's almost getting those left-wing voters for free. Like, they're not even, when you listen to Carney, he's not campaigning as like a diehard left-wing guy. So it's almost like, I guess some people have this idea of him or what he said in the past. But during the election, my feeling is he's going to campaign, he's going to try to be at the center. And doing this will turn off a lot of the NDP moderates. And so the very least, the NDP will remain with 12-15%. It's going to be a massacre in BC. It's going to be a massacre in Northern Ontario, Northern BC. But they will at least not completely collapse. I don't think so. But my instinct has been wrong. If you had asked me 2 months ago if Carney would take so much from the NDP, I don't think I would have predicted this. I would have predicted maybe Karina Gould to do this, but not Mark Carney.
And I still think there's a chance that he really isn't eating into the NDP as much as he is, that we just have the NDP is now the depressed party in the polls, because when you actually polled certain to vote NDP people, even 50% of them just say that Jag needs the wrong leader, where the Liberals get to feel a little bit more enthusiastic about how things are going. The Conservatives have been very positive for more than 2 years now. But then I think also because Carney polls like generic inoffensive Liberal, then you have a lot of this NDP Liberal swing voters willing to come back Liberal. As long as Carney is able to hold up this very kind of squeaky clean, neutral type of a face. And the problem I think that Carney has is that when he's not an academic, but when you've said a lot of stuff, you've sat on a lot of panels, you've spoken at the Century Initiative and whatnot, the amount of actual policy skeletons in your closet are going to be quite high. His love for central bank digital currency, his proposing of carbon tax tariffs, and stuff like that, that's going to be one of those things where, what you're saying in a defensive manner, he's going to have to run a campaign purely defensive on all those fronts and say, no, that's not me anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So he's going to have to run this campaign. And then whenever a throwball or curveball is thrown at him, deeply believes in all those things, right? That's the real Mark Carney, right? The one who is for carbon pricing and all the Great Reset and all this stuff. So it's going to be easy to get him off his game, on topics that they haven't prepared. The one concern I really, really have is what we have seen over the last 10 years in Canada is the left has become much better at getting united. So the left used to be divided, and you used to have those diehard like socialist, Marxist people who were like, environmentalists who said, I'm not going to vote for the center left. Center left is just as bad as center right. But we've seen in Alberta, we've seen in BC, that the left is now fully united. And so the Green, they don't, in BC, they barely steal from the NDP. And in Alberta, literally, there is no more left-wing party. So, and so we need to make sure it's going to become very problematic for the right if this, coalition happens at the federal level. So I'm hoping it doesn't, and I'm relatively confident the NDP at the federal level will not collapse completely. But this is problematic how determined the left has been to, I know I don't like the center left that much, but they're still better than the right and center right. And so we need to make sure that they keep being divided at least a little bit.
I think one thing that Poilievre can do is he's already been doing it partially right already, is that he has to take Canadian nationalistic coded positions that the left cannot take, and it undermines their case of being the real defenders of Canada. So like Poilievre saying that we should be building a military base in Iqaluit and doing all this other actual stuff around increasing military spending substantially and doing things around, like tighter policing of the ports and whatnot. The left will not do that, and then it undermines their case. Or if Carney tries to move in that direction to match Poilievre on the center to the center right, then he ends up pushing a bunch of people back to the NDP because they're the type of people who literally at their conventions propose things like defunding the Canadian military.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. And with that being said, if the election is really about Team Canada nationalism and being the captain of Team Canada, the Liberals do start with a little bit of a built-in advantage, right? For many people, they represent Canada and Canada nationalism. So Poilievre, I think has been doing pretty well recently, and he has read the room relatively well. But that's not a natural advantage territory for him or for his party, unfortunately. That's just not the way it works in this country. Partially because the right has ceded this field for decades to the Liberals. So we need to start fighting back on this one.
Well, that's where I see when he brings up that he wants an immigration cap of 200,000, 250,000. I'm like, dude, make it 150,000, make it 100,000. And you would agree with me on this probably. When you run for election, you don't put out what you would say as like policies nobody could disagree with. You put out audacious policies that are going to alienate half the room, but are going to make half the room love you. Because if you put out stuff like Aaron O'Toole did that 80% of the room agrees with, well, who cares? Because the thing is that they probably agree even more with what the Liberals or the NDP said or the PPC said. So what you need to do is take a policy that your other side cannot copy and a lot of people really like. 100,000 cap on immigration is perfectly reasonable in my mind. It's not saying a ridiculous thing like a moratorium. A lot of people will become excited to vote for that, and your opponents will basically step on a rake by trying to oppose you because they will then have to argue basically against reality about immigration not having been way too high for the past several years. So that's where you always want to be, crafting your policy to do that. It's like, in the BC election, and you've said this publicly, you don't run on a bigger deficit than the BC NDP were willing to say. Were the BC NDP lying? Yes, but every voter's not going to notice that they're lying about how big their deficit's going to be. You run on cuts. You become the party of cuts because the opponent is not going to steal that position from you. And a large portion of the province believes in cuts at this point.
Plus, anyway, for the cuts, we were getting attacked anywhere, right? I mean, so you have a large part of the electorate that truly believes we were gonna cut $4 billion in healthcare. So we get attacks, but we don't get any of the benefits. I think a pretty good example of what you're saying about, you can run on like centrist, well-liked policies and nobody cares is the current Ontario election. I mean, at face value, I'm pretty sure if you look at the proposal of the Ontario Liberals, I'm pretty sure people agree with a lot of those policies, but nobody cares. Nobody cares because it doesn't create any engagement. Right, they might have been better to go bolder, like go with a UBI, do something, create some sort of engagement on day one. But when you go and say we're gonna double, disability payments and whatnot, then everybody's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it's not enough to change your vote. You're still gonna vote for Doug Ford because whatever, he's the guy you like and you know what it is. So yeah, during the election you have to. for a few issues, you have to take some risk, right? You have to go and divide. You cannot be the centrist uniter on every issue. And I think the liberals know this. They've known this for a while, and they've become really, really good at picking those few issues that will create the engagement and the momentum they need.
You got to give Trudeau and his team credit back in 2015. Running as the guy willing to run on deficits is really smart, because no other party in their right mind would usually do that. But guess what? You've now monopolized probably around 30% of the vote for yourself.
Yeah, you did give the NDP.
Some of the other people that are voting for you, they might not like that. They'll get over it, but you already have a big base of people, and then you just need to add. You always want, and this is my thing, I thought Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick was probably the best premier in the country, and probably the best premier that's been in the country for about like 10 to 15 years. But he ran on a 2% HST cut as his keystone policy. Who gives a crap? The HST in like a New Brunswick was like a combined 15%. So they're going to 13. I would have cut the HST by 3% the previous year before the election. And then, because they already had surpluses, you could do it. Cut it by 3% and then run on a 2% across the board income tax cut. That's something that actually like rips up the ground and makes people reconsider how they vote. But so often it's conventional, stupid election wisdom that don't rustle people's feathers, make them comfy. I'm like, no. You should actually be making people uncomfortable, in the sense that they're actually going to think about, okay, is that going to work or is that not going to work? You want people to almost feel concerned about whether or not this is the right move or not, but they think about it.
Yeah. And I think especially for the people, I think it's especially the case if you're going for people who actually want change, right? And we know people want change, and we need to make sure that, as conservative, Mark Carney is trying really hard to get these change voters and to represent the change. He's using the term change all the time. But so one way to represent change is you actually go and propose things that are very different. You're not just proposing the same stuff as the other guys. So, and I think we see it too often where a lot of parties just go, Kevin Falcon's party is dead because that's what he was doing for about a year and a half. He was proposing the same policies, but as the BC Liberal, BC United, and nobody cared.
That's the thing that frustrates me so much. You'll have so many of these examples like Kevin Falcon, Blaine Higgs, Aaron O'Toole, who did what red Tory conventional wisdom says you should do, and they did it to a T, and it didn't work. And you will still have these campaign consultants getting on board election campaigns and telling them what they should be doing if they really want to win. It drives me up the wall. But to circle back to the topic that we started with, this is another one of those things where if Carney wants to rebrand from Trudeau, he should be actually confronting conservative critics and actually showing that he can stand up to them, because Trudeau started that way when he first became prime minister, and that was actually a good move when he used to do those town halls where he'd have tons of people standing up and saying, I don't like that you did this. He had stupid answers. It was, he was usually not getting the good end of it. But to a certain like liberal loyalist voter, he looked good by doing it. Does Poilievre look good when a PPC guy tries to ambush him with a stupid question about the WEF and the UN and like whatever Agenda 2030? No, he doesn't look usually good in those situations. It's not because he's wrong, but when you're being accused by somebody and you have to come up with an answer on the spot, usually you look kind of slightly befuddled and you look like you don't have something good to say. But to your own people, you look like, wow, he's actually willing to stand up and take this question, whereas Carney is a typical, very kind of fussy liberal leader who we saw lose multiple times in the early 2000s. He feels like a Paul Martin, Stefan Dion, and a Michael Ignatieff. That's like kind of a campaign product rather than a character.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But as I said before, though, right, I think the issue is fundamentally Carney is the guy he used to be, right? And so if you let him alone in a town hall, he's probably gonna make some mistake because he has to go against every bone in his body, right? I mean, so you can tell he has been coached very well to talk about the carbon tax, for instance. But there is no way he actually dislikes the carbon tax. He loves it. But so now he has to go say, and they find good rationale, or it's unfair, or it's perceived as being unfair. But it's unless he has prepared, he's gonna make those mistakes on many other issues. When Trudeau, I think Trudeau has his at his peak, like 2012, 2015, I didn't agree with him all the time, but at least I think his instincts were a little bit better, and he had more charisma. Trudeau, you have to give it to him. When he actually was on top of his game, he was actually pretty good. And I don't see this with Mark Carney so far.
Not on policy, obviously. For
no,
we're talking about marketing, because I used to, I still do. I just talked about it a lot in the past, and you tend to talk about it less in the future. Like, people should actually copy certain things that Trudeau did in 2015, not in terms of policy, but in terms of style, the fit and finish of the campaign, the willingness to say something controversial. That was smart, really smart. Anyways, that's probably a good place to end off here. Thank you, Bryan, for showing up on the show. People should go follow him on X. I'll link him down in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. So probably I'm going to have you back on before the election ends up happening, just since you do end up doing a lot of polling analysis. And I think that we'll be riding the polling roller coaster for quite a while now. But yeah, thanks for coming on, and see you next time.
Thank you. That's always a pleasure to come on to your show.